The village of Akum was a quiet and peaceful place where traditions were followed strictly and the spirits of the ancestors were honored. But there was one woman who unsettled the entire village, Ezinne, the woman who laughed at funerals. While others wept and mourned, Ezinne laughed. Not a small chuckle or a nervous giggle, but a loud, uncontrollable laughter that echoed through the air like a clap of thunder. It wasn't the laughter of joy. It was something deeper, something unsettling. The villagers whispered behind her back. "She is cursed," some said. "She is mad," others muttered. Children ran away from her, frightened by the eerie sound of her laughter. Parents warned their children never to go near her. Yet, Ezinne never explained herself. She simply smiled and walked away. Her presence at any funeral filled the mourners with dread. Whenever someone died, the question on everyone's lips wasn't how did they die, but will Ezinne come? One morning, the village of Akum woke up to tragic news. Elder Nwosu had passed away. Elder Nwosu was the wisest and kindest man in the village. He was the one people went to for advice, the one who settled disputes, the one who ensured no child went to bed hungry. His death was a great loss to the village. Preparations for a grand funeral began immediately. People traveled from neighboring villages to pay their respects. The entire village was covered in black mourning cloths, and the sound of wailing filled the air. But beneath all the grief, there was one fear that no one dared to voice out loud. Would Ezinne come to the funeral? And if she did, would she laugh? The thought alone sent shivers down their spines. The funeral was held in the village square, where hundreds of villagers gathered, their faces heavy with sorrow. Elder Nwosu's body lay in a carefully woven raffia casket, surrounded by mourning family members. The village priest stepped forward to begin the ceremony. Just then, Ezinne appeared. She stood at the back of the crowd, wearing a simple wrapper and her usual beaded necklace. Her face was unreadable, her hands folded in front of her. The villagers held their breath. The priest spoke of Elder Nwosu's great deeds, his kindness, and his wisdom. But just as he began to offer prayers for the departed soul, it happened. Ezinne laughed, not a small chuckle, not a nervous giggle, but a deep, earth-shattering laugh that cut through the silence like a knife. The mourners froze in shock. Nwosu's son, Chibueze, shot to his feet, his face red with rage. "How dare you laugh at my father's funeral?" he bellowed. The villagers murmured angrily. Some called for her to be thrown out. Others watched in horror, but Ezinne did not stop. She clutched her stomach, laughing so hard tears streamed down her face. Then, wiping her eyes, she smiled and said, "I am not mocking your father. I laugh because I see what you cannot." The villagers gasped. Chibueze clenched his fists. "What do you mean?" Ezinne shook her head. "You wouldn't understand." And without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving behind a stunned silence. After the funeral, the villagers could not stop talking about what had happened. "What does she see that we cannot?" a woman whispered. "Maybe she knows something we don't," another replied. Some villagers started avoiding Ezinne altogether, crossing the road when they saw her coming. Others kept a close watch on her every move, but no one was more disturbed than Chibueze. "She disrespected my father," he muttered to himself. "I will find out what she meant, no matter what." Determined, Chibueze began asking questions about Ezinne's past, hoping to uncover the truth behind her strange laughter. But before he could learn much, tragedy struck again. A young woman named Adaku, known for her kindness and beauty, died suddenly. Her death sent shockwaves through the village. Adaku had been healthy and full of life just the day before. Now, she was gone. Her mother's wails shook the air, piercing the hearts of everyone who heard her. But as the villagers prepared for another funeral, a terrible thought crept into their minds. Would Ezinne come? And if she did, would she laugh again? The funeral began under a sky filled with dark clouds. Adaku's mother sat in the front row, sobbing uncontrollably. The priest stood to begin the prayers. Just then, Ezinne arrived. She stood at the back, her face calm and unreadable. The priest continued speaking. The villagers watched, Ezinne waiting, fearing. For a moment, it seemed as though she would remain silent. But then, she laughed, louder than before. A laughter so unnatural and unsettling, it sent chills down the spines of every single mourner. Adaku's mother collapsed to the ground, wailing. "Why are you laughing at my daughter's funeral?" she screamed. The crowd turned toward Ezinne, furious. This time, Ezinne stopped laughing. She looked at Adaku. "I do not laugh at your daughter," she said. "I laugh because the truth is near." The villagers gasped. Chibueze's heart pounded. What truth? Chibueze had seen enough. She knows something, he thought, and I will make her tell me. That evening, Chibueze followed Ezinne to her small hut at the edge of the village. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the trees. Ezinne sat outside, staring at the sky when Chibueze arrived. "Tell me what you meant," he demanded. Ezinne sighed and turned to him. "The dead do not rest until their stories are told," she said. Chibueze froze. "What stories?" Ezinne's face grew serious. "Your father and Adaku were killed." Chibueze's blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" he whispered. Ezinne's voice dropped to a chilling whisper. "The dead speak Chibueze, and they are crying for justice." Chibueze's heart pounded in his chest. "What do you mean they were killed?" he demanded. Ezinne remained silent for a moment, her eyes dark as she stared into the fading sunlight. Then she spoke in a tone so calm, yet so chilling, it sent goosebumps over Chibueze's skin. "The dead are never truly silent, Chibueze. When they die before their time, they cry out, but only a few can hear them." Chibueze clenched his fist. "Who killed them? Tell me." Ezinne turned to him and shook her head. "You are not ready for the truth." Chibueze took a step closer, his voice shaking with frustration. "My father was poisoned, wasn't he? And Adaku, was she murdered too?" Ezinne gave a small knowing smile. "You ask the right questions, but some truths are dangerous, Chibueze. Some truths are better left buried." Chibueze grabbed her wrist, desperation in his voice. "If my father and Adaku were murdered, I will find out who did it. I will expose them." Ezinne gently pulled her arm free. Her expression turned serious. "If you continue on this path, you will bring the darkness upon yourself. Be careful who you trust." Then, without another word, she walked into her hut, shutting the door behind her. Chibueze stood there, his fists clenched, his mind racing. Something terrible was hiding in Akum, and he was determined to uncover it. Chibueze could barely sleep at night. Ezinne's words haunted him. The next morning, he sat in his family compound, staring at the dirt floor, lost in thought. His mother, Mama Nwosu, sat nearby, pounding yam in a large wooden mortar. She noticed his silence. "What is it, my son? You have barely spoken today." Chibueze hesitated before answering. "I have been thinking about father's death." Mama Nwosu's hand stiffened on the pestle. She quickly recovered and continued pounding. "There is no need to think about it, my son. He was old. It was his time." Chibueze frowned. "But what if it wasn't?" His mother's movement slowed. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice careful. Chibueze took a deep breath. Someone poisoned him. The pestle fell from her hands, landing with a heavy thud. Mama Nwosu turned to him, her face pale. Who told you that? Chibueze's chest tightened. His mother's reaction was not one of disbelief, but of fear. Does it matter? He asked, watching her closely. Mama Nwosu hesitated, then quickly shook her head. That is nonsense. Your father was not poisoned. But Chibueze saw the way her hands trembled. She was lying, and now he needed to find out why. Chibueze left home, his mind spinning. Who would want his father dead? And why? He decided to speak to Okoro, his father's closest friend. The old man had known Elder Nwosu better than anyone. Chibueze found him under a mango tree, carving a wooden stool. Okoro, I need to ask you something about my father. The old man nodded. What is it, my son? Chibueze took a deep breath. Did my father suspect someone was trying to harm him before he died? Okoro's hands froze mid-carve. His eyes darted around as if making sure no one else was listening. Then he leaned closer. Chibueze, listen to me carefully. Your father, he was a good man, but he was also a man who knew too much. Chibueze's heart raced. Knew too much about what? Okoro swallowed hard. About them. Chibueze frowned. Them? Who are they? The old man opened his mouth as if to speak, but then something changed in his expression. His face twisted in fear, and he suddenly stood up. Go home, Chibueze. Forget about this. Chibueze grabbed his arm. Okoro, please! Okoro pulled away, shaking his head furiously. I have already said too much. If they know I spoke to you, I will be next. Chibueze felt cold. Who are they? The old man turned to him, his face pale, his lips trembling. Then in a whisper he uttered a name that made Chibueze's blood run cold. The Brotherhood. Chibueze sat in his room that night, his mind spinning. The Brotherhood, who were they? Why was Okoro so afraid? He knew he needed more answers, and there was only one person in the village crazy enough to speak freely. Ezinne. But just as he was about to leave his hut to find her, a faint, scratching sound made him freeze. It was coming from his door. Slowly, he stood up, his heart pounding. He took a deep breath and opened the door. A small, folded note was lying on the ground. He bent down and picked it up, his fingers trembling as he unfolded it. The message was short, written in shaky handwriting. Stop asking questions, or you will be next. Chibueze felt a chill run down his spine. Someone knew he was investigating, and they wanted him to stop. He sat back down, staring at the note. Was this a warning or a threat? He needed to move carefully. He decided to go and see Ezinne, but as he stepped outside, something caught his eye. At the far end of the compound, in the shadows of the trees, stood a figure, watching him. Before Chibueze could react, the figure disappeared into the darkness. Someone was following him, and that meant he was closer to the truth than he thought. Chibueze's breath quickened as he stared into the darkness where the figure had disappeared. Someone was watching him, someone who didn't want him to uncover the truth. For the first time, he felt real fear. Ezinne had warned him, and as Okoro had given him a name, the Brotherhood. But what did they want? Why had they killed his father and Adaku? He tightened his fists. He had to find Ezinne. Slipping out of the compound, he moved quickly through the village. The air was thick, the night eerily silent. He reached Ezinne's hut and knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder this time. Still silence. His heart sank. Had something happened to her? Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open. The hut was empty. Ezinne was gone. Chibueze stood in the doorway of Ezinne's hut, his pulse racing. Had someone taken her, or had she run away? The room was almost bare except for a single black cloth lying on the floor. He picked it up and realized it was a mourning wrapper. His mind spun. Ezinne had always worn this. She never removed it. But why had she left it behind? As he turned to leave, he heard a soft voice behind him. "She is gone, child." Chibueze spun around to find Mama Nkechi, the oldest woman in the village, standing by the entrance, her wrinkled hands gripping a wooden staff. "Where did she go?" he asked. The old woman studied him for a long time. Then, in a voice filled with mystery, she said, "She went to speak with the dead." Chibueze swallowed hard. "What do you mean, Mama?" Mama Nkechi leaned on her staff, her eyes cloudy with wisdom. "You ask too many questions, boy." Chibueze's frustration grew. Ezinne said my father was murdered. Do you know anything about it? The old woman sighed and motioned for him to follow her. She led him to the back of her hut where a small shrine stood, covered in dried leaves and ancient carvings. Mama Nkechi placed a hand on the shrine. "There are things in this village that should never be spoken of. But the dead, they refuse to be silent." Chibueze shivered. "Who killed my father?" he pressed. The old woman hesitated. Then she whispered a name that made Chibueze's stomach drop. "Your uncle." Chibueze's world tilted. My uncle?" Mama Nkechi nodded solemnly. "Nnamdi." Chibueze staggered backward, his breath ragged. His uncle had always been close to their family. His father's younger brother, the one who had been at every family meeting, every important gathering. It didn't make sense. "Why would he kill my father?" Mama Nkechi's lips tightened. "Because your father discovered the secret of the Brotherhood." Chibueze's chest ached. His father had died for the truth. And now, Chibueze knew too much. He had to be careful, or he would be next. Chibueze rushed back to his compound, his mind racing. He needed to find proof, evidence that his uncle was involved. Just as he reached his door, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Ezinne. She was back. "You're still alive," she said with a smirk. Chibueze narrowed his eyes. "Where have you been?" Ezinne leaned against the wall. "Speaking with the dead." Chibueze felt a shiver run down his spine. "What did they tell you?" Ezinne's aged expression darkened. "That you are running out of time." Chibueze knew he couldn't stay in the village forever. If Nnamdi was part of the Brotherhood, then others were too. They were watching him, waiting. Ezinne crossed her arms. "You need to leave the village." Chibueze shook his head. "I need to stop my uncle." Ezinne gave him a sad smile. "Then you must be prepared to fight." Chibueze clenched his fists. "I am ready." But deep down he knew. He was afraid. The next day, Chibueze went to confront his uncle. He found him sitting outside his hut, sharpening a machete. Nnamdi looked up, his expression unreadable. "Ah, my nephew. To what do I owe this visit?" Join me next time for part 2 of this captivating story. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Before you go help me grow this community, hit that like button for more thrilling content. Subscribe for new uploads. Comment below with your theories and reactions. Share with friends and family who love a good story. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for being an amazing part of this journey.